These are a few shots of the port area around Anchorage and some of the different high office buildings and some of the construction there that's going on. This is Menindal Glacier again, which is another one of the glaciers you can drive down to and observe very closely. In going to Haines, Alaska to catch the ferry, we had to backtrack 800 miles, and some of which was over the same mud highway that we had traveled on the way to Alaska. However, by taking the highway, or the ferry, we was able to get out of driving about 1,000 miles of the dirt road. This is Mount Drum in the distance. We drove all day and seemed like we would never get there. For a half a day we drove, and the mountain just kept looming higher and higher and higher. Along the highway there's many old cabins and different things that is a reminder of a bygone era. Again, we arrive at Calooney Lake in the Calooney Game Sanctuary, and this time it's much cooler, and the dust of snow on top of the mountains indicating a change in the seasons, and weather is quite different. All the summer tourists are gone, what few there was, and many of the gas stations and resorts are closed, and there are times when it's kind of a tight situation to make sure you have another stop to get gas at times. This is a dirt portion of the road called the Haines Cutoff, which is 130 miles of some of the most desolate and beautiful country I've ever seen. There's no gas stations, just a few cabins and resorts along this 130 miles. Going over the very high pass and dropping down to Haines, Alaska, which is located on the ocean side, the weather changes from very cold and brisk with no leaves on the trees and real fall weather down to almost a rainforest with large ferns and berries on the bushes yet. And this change all takes place in about 15 minutes as you drop over the last pass and continue downward toward the ocean for approximately 15 miles. And they have some very beautiful campgrounds. We thought we had just drove back into the past, back into the late summer weather, as the berries were on the bushes and the leaves hadn't changed too much yet. This is a fish trap. The current in the river rotates the fish trap, and it catches salmon and puts them right in the basket. And this is one of the large ferry boats that we made our 1,000-mile trip over to Sitka and then on down to Prince Rupert, British Columbia before we came home. And around Haines, there's an old Army barracks called Fort Chilkoot, which in the Second World War was quite important as Alaska is very close to Siberia, and a small boat harbor, and the sourdough pizza shop where we spent 2 or 3 days there with good meals, terrific pizza, and downtown Haines, Alaska. Some of the old wrecked boats. And a coyote. Someone had hit a horse on the road, and this coyote seen his chance for a free meal, and he was very reluctant to leave. Here they were catching silver salmon, and while we were standing there, we seen 6 or 7 caught. They're larger than the pink salmon that we were catching earlier. The silver salmon averaged between 20 and 25 pounds. Logging is a big industry and all through southeastern Alaska, and many times they cut the logs and store them in the end of bays like a big corral till they take them onto the sawmill by barge. There are many streams and waterfalls in southeastern Alaska, and we took a side trip to the town of Skagway by ferry while we were there and encountered a severe storm and high wind, 8-foot waves, and so on. As we tied up at Skagway, we stayed on the boat due to the rain and wind. Skagway is the start of the White Pass, which was the gateway to the gold fields that you see up behind in the picture there in the mountains is the White Pass and Yukon Trail. This is the stateroom on the ferry. Most people traveling by ferry system just sleep in the stateroom or sleeping bag rather than rent a room. This is downtown Sitka, Alaska, which is located on Baranof Island and was actually settled by the Russian fur trappers many years ago. Sitka was called the Paris of the North way back in the days when San Francisco still had mud streets. Many of the old sailing ships would come up here to Sitka and the surrounding area and cut ice from freshwater lakes and pack it in sawdust and take it back to San Francisco for refrigeration purposes. This is an old Russian cemetery of long ago, back when the Russian rule still prevailed here in Baranof Island. Here we took a little ride up a road, logging road, to see if we couldn't see some bears next to our campground. And this is the campground itself we stayed at while in Sitka before we left on the boat to go bear hunting. Here we're on the boat in one of the bays bear hunting, and my wife and boy took a little side trip in one of the bays in the cabin of the cruiser we was on. Very enjoyable. Here we're hunting the giant brown bears, walking the salmon stream. The giant bears sometimes reach 1,500 pounds or more and are the largest carnivorous eating animal in the world. A very dense cover makes hunting this bear a very exciting experience. We saw one track that measured 8.5 inches across the front paw, and rounding a bend, here we're walking back out toward the boat on a bear trail. Very exciting hunt. Even though we didn't connect with a bear, we've seen several, but they were all females with cubs, which are not allowed to shoot. And a large boat waiting for us in the bay. One of the side benefits of hunting in Alaska and the southeastern, you get king crabs about any time you want. The boys would put out the crab pot at night, and the next morning we'd have king crabs, and later in the day the captain's wife would prepare a nice meal of king crabs for us, which was almost an evening delicacy every night. This is some of the bottom fish they caught for bait for the crab pot. The seagulls were around most all the time, along with the bald eagles. Here in southeastern Alaska, there's the largest concentration of bald eagles yet in the world, and they're almost as plentiful as the seagulls. They're there by the thousand. Some of these bays are just beautiful and up to 300 feet deep, right up next to shore. One evening while here, the tide went out in the middle of the evening and the boat started to scrape the bottom. This is downtown Sitka again, and one of the pulp mills, which is located on Baranof Island, close to Sitka. And some of the logs stored along the shore waiting to go to the pulp mill. And a small boat harbor at Sitka that we left to go bear hunting and then returned again 8 days later. One evening we spent in the bay with a commercial crab boat, as you see here, and we was riding out a storm, and we sought protection in one of the bays. A Coming into Sitka, we see a small port for float planes, which is about the only practical way to get around in Alaska, as on Baranof Island there's only 27 miles of road, and you can drive about every place there is to drive on the island in half an hour. This is the library at Sheldon Jackson College, located in Sitka, which is one of the oldest colleges in the Western Hemisphere. Here we are at Sitka National Park, which is miles and miles of trails and paths covered with wood chips and kept very neat and clean. The park is quite large. There's wild bears in the park and most all the wildlife that's in Alaska. Many of the paths are lined with totem poles that represent the Alaskan heritage and the Alaskan way of life. One afternoon when the sun was shining very brightly, and it was one of the most beautiful days, we took quite a long walk in the park. It was just a fantastically clean place with the smell of pine trees and the fresh brooks running through it. And this is where the last Russian fort was that guarded the entrance to the bay to Sitka, and one of the huge Sitka spruce logs which we found lying on the beach. And this is one of the huge Sitka spruce trees, sometimes attain a height of 300 feet. The campgrounds in Alaska is in a very natural setting with just places to pull off along the drive throughout the whole campground. This is the day we left Sitka, Alaska, October 17th, and one of the prettiest days that we had while we were there. And as we left Alaska, with many fond memories and fantastic experiences, we didn't feel downhearted at all, even though the hunting trip was not a total success. As a whole, the Alaskan experience and vacation was something that we'll always remember. The ride from Sitka down to Prince Rupert, British Columbia on the ferry took about 2.5 days, and the ferry boats are quite large. Just drive your truck and camper and everything right down into the bottom of them. And here we're on the blacktop again along Prince Rupert. We hit a stretch of road there for about 100 miles. It was almost continuous waterfalls. Beautiful scenery. And the weather was somewhat bad again for taking pictures, as it was quite hazy and not the best. And on down south toward the state of Washington, where we had planned to get back on Interstate 90 and head toward home. And in southern British Columbia, the mining is a great industry, and this is also where some of the old gold mining claims, some of the famous ones, were made. Many millionaires made, and many people lost millions. Again, this is just north of the state of Washington. Also in the area, there's tremendous apple orchards. And here I think we bought a peck of beautiful, delicious apples for only $3. They were just spectacular. Again, this is the middle of October. And there was also some snow a little further south in the state of Washington. As you can see here, everybody has snow, I guess.